The late 1960s, the United States was going through a turbulent time. It was an era when anti-Vietnam War protests echoed through the streets, and young people raised their voices for peace and freedom. Children handed out flowers, music blared louder than ever, and people dreamed of a new world. But behind all those colorful scenes, a dark and bloody shadow was slowly rising. That shadow was a mysterious figure who would go down as one of history's most terrifying serial killers. His identity still unknown: the Zodiac Killer. What set him apart wasn't just the people he murdered. Zodiac turned his crimes into a kind of horror theater. With the letters he sent to the media, he held an entire city hostage and toyed with the police and the public. More than 50 years have passed since the murders, yet his identity remains undiscovered. That is what made him one of the darkest and most enigmatic names in history. The story begins on the night of December 20th, 1968. Near the city of Vallejo, California, on a desolate stretch called Lake Herman Road, a young couple, 17-year-old Betty Lou Jensen and 16-year-old David Faraday, had parked their car to spend some time together. It was supposed to be an ordinary night charged with youthful excitement. But around midnight, several people in the area heard gunshots. When police arrived, they were met with a horrific scene. David had been shot in the head. Betty Lou, who had tried to run, had been shot repeatedly in the back. Their car hadn't been stolen, nor had their belongings. This wasn't a robbery. It was a cold-blooded execution. No one yet knew it was the beginning of a far greater nightmare. Months later, on the night of July 4th, 1969, another attack took place. A young couple named Darlene Farron and Michael Mageau were sitting in their car at Blue Rock Springs Park. Suddenly, another vehicle pulled up beside them. A man got out, shone a flashlight into Michael's face to blind him, and pulled the trigger. Bullets rained into the car. Darlene died at the scene. Michael, though gravely wounded, miraculously survived. What he recounted became the first living testimony about Zodiac. The attacker wore thick-rimmed glasses and used a flashlight to catch his victims off guard. Those details showed the killer acted with planning. Shortly after the attack, the police received a phone call. The voice on the line was emotionless and calm.
I killed the 2 kids last Christmas at Lake Herman Road. I also killed the kids last night at Blue Rock Springs.
That was the moment America met a new name: Zodiac. The killer confessed to the murders yet kept his identity hidden. But the true terror began with the letters he sent to newspapers. On August 1st, 1969, 3 different newspapers received envelopes at the same time. Inside were writings in which he claimed responsibility, taunting remarks, and long ciphers to be solved. He said if the ciphers weren't published, more people would die. Fearing the threat, the papers printed the letters. Ordinary citizens were now part of the game. People opened their morning papers to find Zodiac's words staring back at them. The most famous of these was the 408-character cipher. Took days to crack. In the end, a schoolteacher couple, Donald and Betty Harden, broke the code. The message was chilling.
I like killing people because it is so much fun. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and the people I have killed will become my slaves.
Those lines exposed Zodiac's deranged fantasies. He wasn't content just to kill. He believed that even in the afterlife, his victims would serve him. Zodiac wasn't satisfied by murder alone. He was waging psychological warfare on the police, the media, and the entire city. He created his own emblem, a crosshair inside a circle. It quickly became San Francisco's symbol of fear. Even children shuddered when they saw it. On September 27, 1969, Another couple, Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, was attacked at Lake Berryessa. This time, Zodiac wore a black hood. He had on a strange outfit emblazoned with the crosshair symbol. He bound the pair and then stabbed them repeatedly. Cecilia died. Brian survived by a miracle. Afterward, Zodiac calmly called the nearest police station to report that he had committed the crime. It was as if this wasn't a crime but a play he had staged. On October 11, 1969, in San Francisco, a taxi driver named Paul Stein was killed by a passenger. The killer cut off a piece of the victim's shirt and took it with him. A few days later, he mailed that piece along with a letter to a newspaper. "I did this," he wrote. There was no room left for doubt. Zodiac wasn't just a predator lurking by lakes. He was bold enough to target an ordinary person in the middle of the city. At that point, Zodiac ceased to be merely a killer and became the city's nightmare. In his letters, he wrote that he would target school buses.
"I will shoot out the tire and pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out."
Panic swept San Francisco. Police had to guard school buses daily. Families were afraid to send their children to school. A single man had taken an entire city hostage with fear. In the shadow of envelopes, ciphers, and icy letters, the police were left with a mass of unanswered questions. Detectives worked days and weeks on end. They followed leads, re-interviewed witnesses, and combed through statements for contradictions. The San Francisco, Vallejo, and Napa police departments became interlinked like a net. The FBI eventually joined the case as well. Hundreds of leads were gathered. Thousands of names were checked. Yet Zodiac, like a ghost who managed to erase his tracks, always seemed a step ahead. He misled the investigation with the odd details he left at crime scenes. Sometimes a flashlight, sometimes the peculiar slant of his handwriting, sometimes the ciphers attached to his letters, keeping detectives busy and off balance. The police's worst nightmare was that Zodiac's letters were both evidence and traps. The letters revealed the sender's language, temperament, and intelligence while also being filled with information that might have been deliberately misleading. Some letters seemed to confess to truths, yet carried a mocking tone, a taunt. "You can't catch me," the lines implied. It wasn't just a threat, it was provocation. Zodiac goaded the police, setting traps to make them slip. Drawing public attention and keeping the media's interest alive was, for him, a show of power. The media both fed and magnified his game. Newspapers published the letters. Readers' fear and curiosity made those lines even more visible. People opened the paper each day and, while trembling, debated the ciphers.
Who is the Zodiac?
Such debates turned the figure known as Zodiac into a myth in the city. TV programs, radio shows, and magazine columns discussed the case at every opportunity. Each new letter became a headline and a source of fresh rumors. In a way, the press itself became part of Zodiac's game. Would they publish or would they ignore him? Either choice affected the public mood. Investigators consulted profilers and psychologists to sketch Zodiac's profile. Was he one killer or a team? Analyses of behavioral patterns, choice of victims, methods of attack, and the language of the letters yielded different results. Some experts argued that Zodiac was a solitary, obsessive man whose intelligence stood out. Others looked at various unsolved cases in the area and suggested that while some might be Zodiac's work, others were committed by different criminals. Over time, a few names came to the forefront, the most famous being Arthur Lee Allen. Allen drew attention in the investigation. Those around him said he was a loner, obsessive, and sometimes behaved suspiciously. Many researchers thought Allen could be the Zodiac. Some claimed there were similarities between symbols used in the letters and markings among his belongings. Some survivors' descriptions of the suspect were said to resemble Allen. These parallels stirred a storm around him. Newspapers targeted him. His life was ruined. But no concrete, definitive evidence ever emerged. DNA tests, forensic analyses, and years of research never proved Alan was Zodiac. He passed into history as a suspect, but the case did not close. As technology advanced and forensic methods improved, the case was reopened and the letters were examined with new techniques. Some samples were retested. Certain details became clearer and older conclusions were challenged. Yet even science couldn't unravel all of Zodiac's secrets. Time had eroded the traces and degraded the evidence. Perhaps the largest problem was the killer's meticulous planning. He worked with the precision of a screenwriter, careful not to leave traces. One of the toughest riddles was the cipher known as Z340. For years it occupied cryptographers, from amateurs to professionals, computer scientists to retired soldiers. Until 2020, Z340 kept its mystery, almost as if the killer wanted to challenge people decades later. Finally, an international team solved the bulk of Z340 after long efforts, revealing a text in which Zodiac mocked the authorities with unexpected dark humor. But even the full message wasn't enough to unlock his identity. That was one of the case's slyest aspects. The voice you heard on the phone and the words you read in the letters taunted you, but led nowhere. Speculation and theories shaped the collective imagination. Some argued he was actually a journalist, perhaps someone in the media manipulating the public and police with an elaborate scheme. Others claimed he was a police officer or an ex-soldier, someone with the skills to steer the investigation and erase his tracks. Some amateur sleuths went further still, suggesting that Zodiac had been quietly silenced or that authorities had left the case unsolved to hide certain secrets. None of these theories were ever proven by solid evidence. Each remained a possibility, a story people kept talking about. Time flowed on, years passed. Witnesses from the era of the attacks grew old. Some died. Others were left at the limits of their memories. Media interest waned, but the case never closed. With each new generation, the mystery was revived again through online forums and podcasts. The Zodiac legend was passed down from one generation to the next, becoming a kind of cultural legacy of fear, curiosity, and the unease of an unresolved riddle. Even today, some journalists, amateur detectives, and former police officers believe the Zodiac's true identity can still be found. Every new clue, every old cipher solved, sparks a small flicker of hope. Yet there is also the reality that, over the years, most of the evidence has been lost or risks contamination. Thus the questions remain, crawling along the ground. Who was Zodiac? Why was he playing a game? Why the letters? Why those particular victims? No one can answer with certainty. And perhaps the most disturbing thing is this: through the mystery, Zodiac achieved a kind of immortality. An unknown figure stayed alive in the memory of the media, the public, and history. His most enduring legacy is the unease of unanswered questions and the moments when people found themselves doubting their own safety. Is there more to come? Perhaps. Another letter? A DNA match years later? No one can guarantee it. But we can say this: every time we speak his name, Zodiac's shadow stretches out again. Unsolved puzzles never truly disappear from people's minds. The panic that grew in the shadow of the murders seized not only the gloomy streets of California, but also the entire American agenda. Because Zodiac wasn't only killing, he was wielding a more effective weapon: fear. Every letter he wrote, every symbol he drew, every threat he sent etched itself into the public psyche. People went to work by day. At night, in front of the TV or as they opened their newspapers, they were forced into an unwanted mental bond with this man. Zodiac killed not only with bullets, but also with words. Time and again in his letters, he wrote that he would stop a school bus and kill the children one by one. The idea alone was a nightmare. Armed police were stationed around buses, routes were changed, and drivers were trained. Yet each new day, the level of fear rose, because everyone dreaded waking up to find one of those buses turned into a bloody scene. Perhaps Zodiac never actually carried out this threat, but the threat itself seeped like poison into society's veins. That was his true power. Detectives were drowning in piles of files. New tips arrived daily. Dozens of people suspected of being Zodiac were brought in. Some reported their neighbor's strange behavior. Others suspected a coworker based on similar handwriting. Police logs filled up with names of suspects, but each trail hit a dead end. Zodiac moved like a planned phantom, just as he intended. People had seen him, but no two statements matched. Some said he was large, others said medium build. To some he had brown hair, to others it was sandy or blondish. Contradictory descriptions wrapped the case in fog. Even TV debates of the time added to public unease. Some programs argued Zodiac was a genius defying society. Others said he was a common coward. Yet both sides agreed on one point: Zodiac had managed to confuse everyone. So much so that in a letter sent to the San Francisco Chronicle, he hinted he would reveal who he really was. People discussed that letter for days. Of course, the lines he wrote were again a puzzle, again a cipher, again a mystery. Just a step away from facing his true identity, he erased the clues once more. While the police pressed on, rumors in the city grew like an avalanche. Some claimed Zodiac was one of the police, which was why he couldn't be caught. Others thought he had a military background, that his choice of weapons and methods suggested a professional. Still others argued he was just an ordinary citizen, perhaps even a newspaper employee hidden in plain sight. Each theory birthed a new fear among the public, because it meant anyone could be Zodiac. The neighbor next door, the cashier at the market, the teacher walking down the street. The strange symbols and ciphers in his letters became an obsession for amateur cryptographers. Thousands of people tried to solve them at home. Some spent hours, others days. Most failed, because Zodiac had created not only a cipher but also a mental game. Even when the game was solved, it offered no answers. The cipher, codenamed Z340 in particular, went unsolved for half a century, until 2020 when an international group, aided by computer algorithms, cracked it. What emerged was, once again, Zodiac's mocking voice. "You're trying to catch me, but it's futile," he said in essence. For him, the point was always to make people struggle, to sow confusion and deceive a whole society. In another letter, he wrote that the people he killed would be his slaves in heaven. That line reflected not only a religious fixation but also his delusions of grandeur. He wanted to make himself immortal, believing that even in death, those he had murdered would serve him. This shows Zodiac wasn't an ordinary killer. His mind housed far darker fantasies. Amid the murders and letters, even everyday life changed. People stopped going out at night and avoided lockshores. Young couples were afraid to meet in their cars. Parents gave their children strict warnings. The presence of one man altered the behavior of an entire city. Perhaps the most frightening part was Zodiac's sudden silence. After the mid-1970s, no new letters arrived and no new murders were clearly linked to him. The silence only deepened the confusion. Did he die? Did he assume a new identity? Or did he simply get bored and move to another city? These questions remain unanswered. Even his silence was a riddle. Each new year brought fresh investigators. Retired detectives, amateurs, journalists, online sleuths. Everyone proposed their own theory to unmask Zodiac. But all stalled at the same point. Zodiac was a master at concealing his identity. Like a ghost hidden in the shadows, he erased his trail. And as years passed, Zodiac became less a person and more a legend. He topped the lists of unsolved murders. Popular culture carried his story into films, books, and songs. Yet no fiction could surpass the horror of the reality, because this wasn't a story. It was the truth, and an unresolved one at that. Arthur Lee Allen became the most debated name in the Zodiac file. Because of his lifestyle, unsettling behavior, and certain witness statements, he drew intense scrutiny. His troubling history involving children, the unease he caused those around him, symbols noted in his notebooks, all of it increased suspicion. There were plenty of small clues pointing to him as Zodiac. But small clues never grew into decisive proof. Police searched his home multiple times, took statements, tested blood samples, but never found direct evidence tying him to the murders. When Allen died in 1992, the Zodiac case remained open. That may be the most painful part of the file. The prime suspect died, but the secret didn't. There were other names, too. Some amateur sleuths suspected a journalist named Rick Marshall. His love of movies, his typeface choices, and certain mysterious details in his life made him interesting, but evidence was lacking. Others mentioned a man named Lawrence Kane. His whereabouts during some of the attacks drew attention, but again, no definitive proof. The suspect list in the Zodiac file is long, but none of the names could be underlined in red with the words, "This is the one." Over time, new technologies entered the picture. DNA analyses, forensic examinations, microscopic samples taken from the letters, all scrutinized one by one. Some results excluded suspects. None confirmed anyone definitively. Perhaps that was Zodiac's greatest triumph. He left clues just incomplete enough to prevent resolution, yet powerful enough to keep curiosity alive. He played his game so well that even half a century later, people are still trying to fit the same puzzle pieces together. Theories never ended. Some claimed Zodiac was inside the police force, always one step ahead because he knew the methods they would use. Others believed there were multiple people, that a group operated under the name Zodiac and shared the murders among themselves. That could explain contradictory witness statements. And there was another theory. Zodiac was never caught because he died at some point, maybe in a traffic accident, maybe from illness. But his death went unnoticed. His identity was never revealed. He simply vanished. This sounds plausible because after the mid-1970s there were no new letters or clearly linked murders. Could the silence be a sign of death? No one knows for sure. On the internet, in forums, and in documentaries, Zodiac is still being discussed today. A new generation of researchers pores over old police reports line by line, rereads the letters, and reattempts the ciphers with computer algorithms. Every generation dives into the file with the hope of being the one to solve it. But each time, they run into the same fog. Zodiac's identity remains unknown. That's what makes him different. The longer his identity remains unknown, the greater his power grows. If Zodiac were caught today, he might be remembered as just another serial killer. But because his identity remains mysterious, he became a legend. His name is written at the summit of unsolved cases. In humanity's memory, he sits at the top of the list of what we couldn't solve. And perhaps that's what he wanted most: immortality. Along with the lives he took, Zodiac also stole an entire city's peace. His shadow hung not only over crime scenes, but also over people's daily lives. Young couples afraid to go by the lake, parents anxious as they put their children on the bus, people looking over their shoulder while walking at night. All of that was his doing. Even today, some still shudder when they see Zodiac's symbol, the crosshair within a circle. That sign represents not just a killer, but an unsolved riddle. It triggers the fear born of uncertainty in people's minds. Because the greatest fear comes from the unknown. That is exactly what Zodiac created, the unknown. Every time we talk about him, we're in a way rejoining his game. Even speaking his name may serve his wish, to be remembered. And yes, he succeeded. More than half a century has passed since his murders, yet we still speak of him. We still ask, who was the Zodiac? Perhaps it's a question that will never be answered. But maybe that's the point. By remaining unknown, Zodiac made his story endless. He left us stuck in the middle of a sentence, with no idea where it ends. A story without a final act. And maybe that's why a chill still runs through us when his name is mentioned. Stories end, files close, but uncertainty never disappears. If you'd like to see more cases wrapped in mystery like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.